I first met Louise March many years ago. At that time, her dwelling was on the corner of 79th Street and I believe Lexington Avenue or 3rd Avenue. She was working with a group of people, and she was the one who translated all and everything from the language that Gurdjieff spoke into German, which was her native tongue, and from German into English. I really wasn't quite clear at the time about Mr. Gurdjieff's religious orientation. Louise March informed me that Mr. Gurdjieff was a completely highly religious man. And that the book, All and Everything, was, in a manner of speaking, Mr. Gurdjieff's response to the Bible. He meant it to be an extremely multifaceted religious work, comparable to or surpassing what we see in the Bible. I can't say I was surprised, but I wasn't prepared for that. In the following readings in the ensuing years, there are slants and pieces of what Mr. Gurdjieff is saying, what Mr. Gurdjieff's beliefs were. As we all know, all and everything is more than difficult to understand. However, it's rather obvious that Mr. Gurdjieff, being from Albania, Russia, his connections were directly with the Greek Orthodox Church. His writings about his father, writings about his first teacher. So that places us on the line towards Greek Orthodoxy. That would be rather simple. But then there are numerous mentions that what he is dedicated to has its origins in Egypt. In Egypt, there were mostly two main springs. Christianity and the Coptic religion. The Copts being one of the very, very early Christian denominations. They were once in a very powerful position. Throughout the years, they got smaller and smaller and smaller. Today, I believe they suffer from a great persecution. There aren't many Copts left in Egypt or anywhere else. Let that sit aside. Mr. Gurdjieff, as we know, died in 1949. In 1952, in a small village in the Near East, a workman, not a scholar, a plain workman, comes across a vase that he thinks may have some value. So he takes it home, doesn't know what's in it. His wife doesn't think it has too much value, and she ruffles around inside and she sees that there's paper in it. So she comes to the conclusion, we need heat more than we need paper. So she grabs the papers and throws them into a fire and begins to heat up the house. Through a series of steps, accidents, ideas, the workman wishes to sell these findings. These findings reach the government of Egypt. They're rather suspicious, these writings. They seem very old. The parchment seems very, very, very old. What to do? Well, great authorities and great readers and great people are called, and the paper is examined, everything is examined and re-examined and sent away, sent to this. An immense project goes on, and they come to a conclusion that these are genuine papers, genuine writings, dating back to the time of Christ. Valuable beyond words. Unfortunately, a good half of them were burnt up to heat the house. But what was saved has been known as the Dag Hammadi papers. They were found in the town of Dag Hammadi. They've been examined and re-examined. They are considered one of the world's treasures. These writings presented the idea that it wasn't a secret, that was known, but not known as clearly. That at the time of early Christianity, the Jesus story, the apostles, the saints, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. These views were disputed very, very heavily and very passionately by opponents of that idea. The result as we know it today, a couple of thousand years later, is that the Orthodox Christian tradition conquered all the dissenters. Probably the most lucid idea is that the Orthodox Church went along the idea of power, money, government, and became in itself an extremely powerful government. The people who disputed this, little by little, by little, by little, they were put aside, cast aside, killed when necessary. No contest. And it gives us one of the first clear pictures of how the Orthodox Church captured the people of Christian terminology. The church offered a government, a place where you could go that did not change, a building. The competitors did not have buildings, did not have government. They captured the ruling class, they captured the military class. They offered a structure with all the answers to everything, in a manner that the uneducated peasantry could understand. And they asked of the followers an allegiance and a vow to believe and then act and live in terms of the theology that was presented in the Orthodox Christian Church. The word Orthodox has nothing to do with Hebrewism. It has to do with the traditional first. Orthodox, the standard. Years and years and years and years passed, and that orthodoxy has never, ever, ever lost its power, has never, ever lost its government. A string of leaders from, for instance, the Pope all the way down bishopric to the priest in a neighborhood church, a complete line of command, very much like a government, very, very much like an army. When the Orthodox Church was disputed or attacked in any way, it defended itself with an army. The Spanish Inquisition being a small of many examples. However, that was not enough to completely destroy the opposition, and the opposition, quiet, they had their following. One of the basic principles between the beliefs of the Orthodox Church and what came to be known formally as the heretical church, perhaps one of the biggest statements was that you must love God. Clear and simply stated for everyone to see, you must love God. You are born in sin. Adam betrayed God with adultery and his body. Food from the tree, sex. They left nothing open without a complete and solid answer. God was all good. There are no bad parts to God. God is the embodiment, or the spiritual embodiment, of pure goodness. And several dictates down the line, the Ten Commandments we include, all the Bibles as we know them, the Old Testament, New Testament, that's the package. That package exists today. It's an extremely well-known fact that the most powerful government on earth at this time is the Vatican. No government has that amount of money. No government has that amount of power. No government has said, no, you cannot look at our books. We are beyond your examination, beyond your touch. We exist. So I'm beginning to get traces of Mr. Gurdjieff's thinking, his ideas. Where was he going? And I confess, at this point, I still don't know, and far from it. Now, the ancient Greeks were a civilized society. There was Zeus, there was Hermes, there was all of them. Tons of gods. Today, something happened, you needed the help, you called upon a god. Help me. I'm sorry, but that God is not in town. He's on vacation. His girlfriend and he had decided to travel around the mountain and call somebody else, of course. So you had a choice of gods to call. Some gods were more in the area that you wanted something from. Numerous gods. The Native Americans, numerous gods. God of rain, God of wind, God of this, God of that, numerous gods. Aztecs, numerous gods. It's almost impossible to find a society that is monotheistic, only one God. Indigenous people, as a rule, generally have more than one God. Well, this battle between the Orthodox Church and its demand that God is not only pure, God is one. That turned into heresy, that turned into torture, that turned into the sins of the church, as they are called, for hundreds of years. there was another big movement that is now at this point almost gone. It had its very, very powerful, powerful days. It had the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of a few other apostles, very, very powerful and prolific thinkers. They were of the opinion that God was not perfect. They were of the opinion that the third party of the triumvirate had given birth in an improper manner to something called the demiurge, who has passed himself off as the only leading God since that time. And they are still of the idea that the madness that we see in the world is not the work of the primary God, but the work of the God of darkness, the demiurge. That all gods and all people have darkness and they have light. The line begins to be drawn between the work and these ideas, in that the work states that the mission of the person in work is to learn about themselves, to study themselves, to master themselves, to see by much, much observation that they have parts that are mad, that are dark, that are a million things. So it comes out that these Gnostics are saying you don't have to believe in a God. You don't have to obey a God. You don't have to live under the commandments of a God. Your work lies in understanding yourself. Well, I see that presented before me, and now life makes a little more sense to me. According to the Gnostics, my task, the worker's task, is to understand themselves, knowing that this is not a sin. Now we understand more clearly Dr. Maurice Nicole writing a book called The Mark. The translation of mark is sin. To miss the mark is to sin. Not understanding yourself, not studying yourself, that is missing the mark. That's what the Gnostic church was about. And understanding ourselves is not only much of Mr. Gurdjieff's efforts, but Sigmund Freud before him and Carl Gustav Jung after him. The demiurge was given birth to by a god of knowledge and intelligence and wisdom called Sophia, Sophia. A few other facts that I've thrown together for you. Just putting them out and see where they go. Alan Watts, the modernistic poet, was quite a bit of a thinker. I've been reading what he has to say. As long as the mind lives in the I, it can do nothing. It is under the spell of death and cannot save itself. So long as one thinks that I can do anything in the way of a creative act, we are truly alive in the now only. The I cannot do anything. The I being a terminology of mind. The abandoning of the I is the miracle that was seen as life and is realized to be the ideal. Think of I am alive as meaning I am dead and I want to live. The I can only think in terms of its own past. It is historic. I did, I said, I went, I thought. According to these texts, all that is the spirit of death because the past has already died. And what speaks and thinks cannot think in terms of the living present. We've come across the terminology, remember yourself. And we think, here I am, I'm sitting in the chair. I'm remembering, I can even remember what I did yesterday. I remember what I had for dinner. Yeah. When I think I remember yesterday, I'm really fooling myself. I can't. I remember your yesterday. Very weird. Anyway. Here's an interesting catch from the basis of the fourth way work, which is all based on remember yourself. To dismember means to make numerous sections, multi-sections. That's dismember. The body was dismembered, the head was here, the feet were there. To remember means restoring the original unity before the parts were put aside. As far as I see, that's enough work for a good student to chew on for maybe 10 years. To remember. Also, there are parts to say that the mind that thinks, the thinking center, as we call it, is not a thinking center. That part that does the choosing, the thinking, is within the soul, within the heart center. what is referred to, what I did, where I went, what I'm doing. It's called like a calculation type of thought. It is not a center. An abstract piece, do some work here, is that the monastic initiation requires the giving up of your name. That's why in the monks, Brother Paul, Brother Peter, Brother this, Brother that, your name is never used again. Point one. In the Hebrew tradition, when a friend or a relative or a child or a son or a daughter does something that really ends it, the lapel is torn. That name is never to be mentioned in that house again. If it's your son or your daughter, whoever it is, that name is never to be mentioned. With this act, I tear my cloth, I tear my suit, I tear my vest. That person is now within these walls officially dead, never to be spoken of again. Tie that up with the idea of entering a monastery and leaving your name, leaving your profession, leaving your business, your wife, whatever you had. Interesting. And as a rather odd spin, when you come into the Foreign Legion, you're asked, what would you like your name to be? John Smith it is. Whatever name you had before is torn up, dissolved, gone. Your passport is gone. What nationality are you? I am no nationality. I belong to the Foreign Legion. Somewhere, the real world and the real life of man have neither a past nor a future. Reality moves through the void of nothingness. Carl Jung says, what is taught as the doctrine of disenchantment is the freedom from illusion, is the proper health of the mind. Kierkegaard writes a book called The Fear and the Trembling. In the Gospel of the Philippians, it says, quote, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That statement is at least 1,500 years old. Goes further on the research to say trembling is the necessary consequence of sin, of missing the mark, and confusing the present self, which is alive and free, with the past self, which is dead and dismembered. One trembles because of the unsolvable paradox created by the necessity of performing a free act with predetermined values. Here's a piece that I dug up. The I was is the part that's known to us. The I am is never seen and never known. The burden that man has lived under, and this is my statement, the burden that it has lived under with the monotheistic Christian God has always represented that I am born in mortal sin as a human. I come to this life already foul. I must confess forever the darkness within myself and stamp out the darkness within myself. I, the speaker, could never ever in my life agree with that, and I didn't. Maybe I've been inside a traditional church a few times in the last 40 years, for one reason or another, never to attend a service. I ask people, if it is said somewhere that we are made in the image of God, how come we are traditionally so crazy, so brought to darkness, so brought to desire? Well, then I guess that means we're not made in the image of God. Or does it mean that the God presented us is not as accurate a description as something else? Each of the indigenous tribes has many, many names for their gods. The Greeks, I believe, had 100 and something gods. Carl Jung put together his idea of a god that made sense to him. And he called it Abraxas. Abraxas is a combination of the devil as we know him and God as we know him. Good and bad, strong and weak, sane and insane. When we look at our own weaknesses, our own darkness, why must we feel that we are at fault, that we are short, that we have missed the mark? Because other traditions allow us to believe that we have not missed the mark. That is the normal creation of man, and that is the normal life of man, to study his darkness, to study his light, to study himself And by studying himself, he will realize all there is to be realized. There is nothing to be holy to. There is nothing to obey. Remember when we spoke about the doorknob? For your doorknob, you have your name. It doesn't have to be my name for your doorknob. I have mine. Everyone can have his. It is not, I am evil, I am stupid, I am dark, I am possessed by madness. No, the conflicts of thoughts. The conflict is what gives us focus. Yes, within the expanse of the self, there is this and there is that, and we can select. And so forth, so forth, so forth. That's what I've been chewing on for a couple of months. I have a very dear friend, a very educated, thinking man, John Vett. And we have been speaking on and off for 30 years, at least, maybe more like 40. And I mentioned that my views on things, his are not these views. And he said to me, Gil, you are not a Christian. Being a Christian involves accepting the Christian myth, accepting the Christian story, accepting the return from the dead, accepting the Immaculate Conception. When I thought about that, I felt a sigh of relief. No, I could never, ever in my life at all believe the myth that a Son of God became incarnate. Not a Son of God, actually, the part of God that is part of the triumvirate came to earth, died for me, etc., etc. Among the Nag Hammadi libraries are more and more writings of the apostles, more writings of James, more writings of Thomas, more writings of Paul. And even within the Gnostic framework, there are disagreements. But the basic idea that knowledge and freedom come from studying yourself, not studying yourself as a pattern or as a part of a project that includes others. Your study is yourself for the purpose of understanding yourself, for the purpose of of getting past illusion, and in that state where the person is free of illusion, then they understand themselves and others and life. So I guess I have a table full of books, heavily underlined. They're getting more underlined every day, and I see a good 8 to 10 years work in front of me. This including the ideas of reincarnation, so far at this point I've got 2 main tracts. They're not connecting that terrific right now. But I have a faith, I guess you would call it, that at some point they will connect more. You all know that I started a project of prayer some months back. It's my firm belief that a being who has died immediately enters the spirit world, immediately faces a kind of judging, and needs desperately to be reminded that in its living state it did good, that it was loved, that it continues to be loved. Because the being in transition, and the transition can be from months to years, the being little by little leaves the life of earth, leaves the life of the body. And again, all the writings that I have mentioned, all of them, based on the fact that the human body is the weight, it's the closure, it is the major difficulty for attaining freedom. So the spirit, I believe, must be spoken to, spoken with, and reminded that even though its body is gone, it, as a living entity, is respected, is remembered, is still loved, and has not died in a traditional sense. Yes, the body is no longer in use. And it is my opinion that the dead, once having discarded the weight of this body, in time will learn the freedom of not having it. Somebody once asked me not long ago about, do thoughts influence our soul? Doesn't have a very clear yes or no answer. What I came to was that in a broad sense, a piece of bread adds more want to the body. When we chew a piece of bread or anything that the body wants, we are affirming the body. And another tradition says to put more and more distance between yourself and the body. I've been thinking, whatever someone does, try to remember, I am doing this for this kind of reason, and in this manner, so forth, give it thought. Eating mechanically, living mechanically, having is really, according to many writings, a form of death and enslavement. Let's talk a while, then I'll tell you another story about 3 weeks ago. Let me hear from people. Let me hear from you.